Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the owner and founder of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and this is a channel where we provide free personal development tips and tools for your subconscious mind. So today, I really want to take some time and do a series here about attachment styles, specifically the fearful avoidant attachment style and boundaries. I've noticed a tremendous amount of amazing questions and just engagement in general about attachment styles here and on this channel. And a lot of questions come up specifically about the fearful avoidant, and a lot of conversations are coming up about boundaries. So I super appreciate all the engagement, the questions, everything, and I will keep making videos based on some of these questions that are popping up. So for the sake of today's video, I really want to talk about the importance of boundaries for the fearful avoidant, because without boundaries, a fearful avoidant attachment style individual is probably going to always suffer in relationships. So first and foremost, we have to understand really what boundaries are. And what boundaries really come down to is that there are our own personal limits that we have, usually expressed to us through our feelings and usually based on our needs. So we may have a series of unmet needs that we have to sort of get met, and that can be its own boundary in a way. Or we may have a need that we want something to stop or end or pause, and that will be its own limitation being expressed. And if you pay close attention, the expression of what you need will actually come to you through your feelings. But here's part of the problem. The fearful avoidant usually has a bit of a pattern that when they are around other individuals that they're loving in relationships, sometimes in friendships as well, but definitely primarily in relationships, the fearful avoidant usually loses their sense of self. So what does that mean? Well, a large part of what sort of makes up the fearful avoidant attachment style is that there are usually, not always, but usually a strong pattern in childhood that exists for this attachment style where they were basically forced to give up their boundaries in totality. And this can be through, abuse, and that their, bodies, physical or sexual abuse were violated and they couldn't have boundaries. Or this can just be that they were like always caught in their parents fighting, always stuck in the middle of things, always expected by their parents to fix everything for them. So maybe a parent was a drug addict or alcoholic or had some sort of reason to be dependent or reliant on the fearful avoidant attachment style. And in this case, what you'll see, which is really prevalent, is that the fearful avoidant loses their own sense of individuality to their parent or caregiver at a fairly young age, or to any other individual that's a large part of their life at a fairly young age. And so what this creates is sort of like an enmeshment trauma, where as soon as they're around other people, especially in loving relationships, they just like fully give themselves over. They fully abandon themselves, and they really lose their sense of self to relationships as a general rule, and really lose their sense of, what they're feeling, what they're needing, and thus what their boundaries are. So relationships for the fearful avoidant are sort of like re-triggering some of that attachment pattern. Now, here's the interesting thing. Usually the fearful avoidant at the same time, like sort of coped with or survived that really challenging situation in childhood through that exact mechanism that is now causing them pain. So usually the fearful avoidant, when they would give themselves over completely or just let their boundaries be violated or just give up their sense of boundaries altogether, usually that actually helped them survive those early challenging situations. So it's actually a coping skill that they have developed, and it's become a subconscious comfort zone or what they know for how to be in relationships. Hence how the fearful avoidant tends to express either side of the attachment spectrum. So let's say, for example, the fearful avoidant appears, they go into the relationship and it's like they're loving and giving like the anxious attachment style. They, know your needs. They can be super available, do everything for you. And then they start getting triggered enough because it's actually reminding them of old patterns. They're also carrying this assumed rejection and they don't trust that other people will, other individuals that they love will meet their needs, or that they can be safe expressing their feelings because they felt like that in childhood. And so they have enough, and they pull way back if they feel any form of rejection or any sort of like upbringing of this old pattern that they experienced that was so painful and traumatic in their early years. And so it re-triggers that avoidance side. So they can go from being like so giving, so loving, so extreme, get this triggered impact, and all of a sudden they're right back to like being avoidant again. So they have to pull back and protect themselves. And this happens in one of two ways. They can just like seemingly go missing and disappear a little bit. Or this attachment style can actually, unintentionally at a conscious level, but actually intentionally at a subconscious level, be creating turmoil or conflict, sort of as an excuse to maintain that space again. Like if I push you away, I can get that space, and then I'm no longer in that re-triggered state of having to give you everything and meet all of your needs and all of your hopes and expectations and all of that. And I can just be myself again for a moment. And so it's really important to keep in mind that there's a lack of trust here for the fearful avoidant, that anybody will meet their needs or want to see them or give back to them as much as they're giving to others. And that lack of trust, when that's activated in any way, anything is brought up that reminds them of that, it's extremely excruciating and painful because it reminds them of all of this emotional turmoil they went through in younger years. And they respond by either exploding or just, going missing altogether, and that's that. So the boundaries part is so important, not just because we're actually trying to set like limitations and understand what our boundaries are, but because, some of the core wounds for a fearful avoidant attachment style are actually solved through the dedication and commitment to their own boundaries. So some of the core wounds are like feeling unseen and unheard. Usually the fearful avoidant gives of themselves, essentially, physically, sexually, mentally, emotionally, whatever way this happens. Usually they completely give of themselves in childhood. And so, what sort of happens here is because they're giving, essentially, when they are re-triggered in this specific manner, it's bringing up all those stored things, and they feel like they're sort of in a one-sided relationship. So they'll sort of feel as if, they can get their emotional needs met to a degree, like either their situation becomes a little bit safer, or they get some form of attention or presence from a parent or caregiver or the abuser or whoever it is, when they don't respect their own boundaries. But so they'll get like a little bit of this presence and connection, but it's to serve the other person. It's not necessarily anything to do with like what their own individual needs are. And so, because these are some of the patterns that this attachment style is coming into and it is going through, it can be, they'll feel things like unseen, unheard, don't matter, unimportant, unloved, distrust. And again, like keep in mind, our attachment styles usually develop in very, very, very early years. But usually, as early as these attachment styles develop, they're sort of precursors for everything we then experience, in sequence after that in childhood. Like usually if we already have this attachment style, we're in a chaotic home, a place where we can't trust other individuals, we don't feel safe, we don't feel connected, there's a lot of incongruencies between what, we're told and what we actually experience. And so all of these things play a really prevalent role in what our wounds are in later life. So when we set boundaries as the fearful avoidant attachment style, what happens is for the first time we're actually being seen and heard because we're making sure that we are. We are expressing our needs. We're seeing our needs through. And in doing this, we're actually solving some of these core wounds that we're so afraid of reliving in relationships anyways. So this is really, really important to start doing, is to start expressing very specifically what your boundaries are. Now, keep in mind, conflict communication should basically be mastered by fearful avoidance, okay? So the fearful avoidant will tend to communicate their needs when they've like had it up to here and they're super angry and frustrated, and they'll just kind of explode, and that's not communicating your needs. That's communicating unresolved emotion from the past and projecting it onto your present moments and punishing others for it a lot of the time without meaning to, without having those intentions, because fearful avoidants do not like hurting people, or just withdrawing altogether and abandoning somebody in a way, and not meaning to again, but just feeling like exhausted with the caretaking of another person or another person's needs all the time. And so you have to learn how to participate in the equal exchange of energy, and you have to learn to communicate what your needs are specifically and explicitly. And here's a really important part. So I have a whole video about conflict communication and feeling unseen and unheard. I totally recommend, if you're a fearful avoidant, you go watch that video because it's nicely laid out in detail. But something that's important to just recognize is, for you to get heard, for you to be able to express yourself, you first need to know what you're feeling and needing. And again, usually you're a little bit almost dissociated from this stuff, because the moment you're around somebody else, that like enmeshment trauma pattern gets activated, and you're like, oh, this person's needs, this person, as soon as you're around somebody you love or care about, it's like you don't exist. You almost abandon yourself at an emotional level and become so hyper-focused on that other person, so hypersensitive to their needs and their feelings and what's going on with them, because you're so afraid at some deep level of connection. You've seen connection be so painful for so long that you actually have like a hypersensitivity to what could be going wrong, what could be going right, how do I deal with this, because you're just coping to not re-experience pain. And so, for fearful avoidance, I hear so often that like relationships are so painful, relationships are so hard. Oh my gosh, I can't do relationships again. It's so challenging because you never quite settle in. You're not in this expression of like, I give and I allow myself to receive. It's like you give all of yourself, and then when you don't receive, you feel rejected again. And like either side of what you're experiencing in a relationship is basically triggering deeply stored emotional pain. And I find a lot of times that this is a topic that comes up so much with so many different individuals over the years, is that, fearful avoidant attachment styles are often confused with borderline personality disorder. And I think this is something that's really interesting, and maybe a topic I'll do for another video just to make some really clear distinctions. Of course, you can have both of these experiences, but I think there's some really important details to point out that differentiate the two. Anyways, we'll get into that in a different video. So when you are in conflict, you need to know how to communicate. Communication means first getting in touch with your own feelings and expressing, hey, I'm feeling unseen. I'm feeling not tended to. My needs are not met. I'm feeling hurt. I'm feeling sad. And you want to express the emotion that you're experiencing through vulnerability. Because when you do that, you actually give yourself an opportunity to be heard. We have to remember that all of us come from a conditioned childhood where when we were usually criticized or told that we did something wrong, we were then punished or shamed. So our brain, as a survival mechanism, goes into a defensive mode the moment that we feel criticized or shamed. And that goes for like when the fearful avoidant is trying to communicate how they're feeling. If it comes across as critical or shamed, the fearful avoidant will just feel rejected again and further unheard, because usually their partner is going to go into defending themselves or attacking back as a means of defense. So we have to express from a space of vulnerability. And while this is so terrifying for the fearful avoidant, it is also extraordinarily important. That vulnerability is part of what helps us to heal. So that's a central piece. So I feel, insert your emotion, and I need, and be clear and specific about your needs. If you need support, don't just say support. Say, I need support, and support for me looks like, more validation, more encouragement, doing the dishes more often, whatever it is, be explicit. And keep in mind that you're doing this for you. You're not doing this for, your partner or the results, or you're doing this for you. So most of the time, people are, through proper conflict communication and vulnerability, people are going to be highly responsive. If they're not, it's not about the result. It's about that you're learning how to master this form of communication so that you can see your needs through, give yourself a chance to really understand what your own feelings and needs are, and actually get those needs met. And it's through the repetition of doing this that our needs really get met. We're not necessarily going to express something one time and everybody's going to follow through 100% after that. Sometimes we have to remind people gently. And if they forget, it's not rejection. It's that they have a little bit of learning and growing and understanding of us to do. And sometimes, the fearful avoidant will also take one mistake from their partner as a big rejection, and it will reactivate some of that stored pain or wounding. So these are important things to keep track of. And the last point I really want to touch on, besides the expressing our feelings and needs as a form of boundary, is that the fearful avoidant struggles with also the wounds of feeling mistrust and unloved, because they are the primary, how do I say this? They are like the primary, most intense version of how they cannot trust and love. And this could be taken in many different ways, but I want to be really clear about this. For the fearful avoidant, the moment you get into a relationship, you abandon yourself to some degree. What your needs and what your feelings are by nature get washed away. And so you can't trust yourself to show up effectively for yourself when you're going into a relationship. So you betray your own trust. And so the moment somebody else does that, it's excruciatingly painful, because you've outsourced your need for trust. And you don't trust yourself to show up well in the relationship. So that person better, because you're showing up for them, they have to show up for you. It's sort of that codependency type of cycle there. Now, if you could learn to trust yourself, to communicate your needs, to express how you feel, to be vulnerable, to see your needs through, you wouldn't be in so much pain when somebody else mirrors to you how you're treating yourself. So it's a really important point to take note of. And one other really important point there is the unloved piece. The distrust piece. That was the unloved piece, the abandonment of self. The trust piece it's sort of these two pieces. They kind of have some overlap, but you'll find that when you are not being able to follow through with your own needs, like let's say somebody doesn't meet your needs, if you turn around and you're like, oh, now my needs are not being met, and you're only relying on them, then of course you feel unloved and mistrustful or distrusting. So what you want to be able to do is recognize that somebody will not always be available to meet your needs. Your partner's not always going to be perfect. People are going to make mistakes. They're going to be unaware. They're going to be emotionally unavailable at times when they're going through challenging situations in their lives. And your job is to be able to be extremely clear about what your needs are, and recognize that if this person is not available at this time to meet my needs, I can take space in a kind and gentle way, and I can meet my own needs at the same time. Relationships are not black and white. It's not, somebody's meeting all of your needs and you're meeting all of theirs, or nobody's meeting any of them. It's, we ask for our needs to be met. We follow through with that. We become repetitive, and we, really explain and almost like teach our partners what our needs are and how to meet them. And at times when that person's unavailable, we are fully available for ourselves to be clear about what we need and how to get those needs met. And we want to have a healthy experience of both sides, of healthy dependency to a degree, but healthy independence. That's extremely important as well. And you'll notice the fearful avoidant, goes from 0 to 60 in the opposite way. It's like they're so unhealthily dependent, and the moment that feels violated, they become so unhealthily independent. And what we want to be able to do is have both available to us in gentle and kind, and have those gray areas available to us, because people will not always be there. And it doesn't mean that it's this reactivation of nobody caring about you, or forms of emotional neglect from childhood, or you not mattering, or you being so unseen and unheard that nobody notices. It doesn't mean any of that. It means that sometimes we have to take care of ourselves too. And I think that's one of the most important lessons for the fearful avoidant, is being able to self-care in a way while in relationships, and learning how to have that healthy balance. So I sort of babbled a little bit in this video because, to be honest, I usually write a little piece of paper with key points and notes, and within the first 10 seconds of this video, just so I stay on track, the paper toppled over, so I just sort of went with it. But I hope I got a lot of these key points across to you guys, and I really appreciate that people are providing so much feedback and really vulnerably expressing how important of a topic this is. So please, if you have more questions about fearful avoidance or other attachment styles, I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of videos on this in the next little while. Please feel free to share, connect, communicate. And I also have a wonderful team of individuals that I've trained to deal with all sorts of different clients and specifically attachment style issues. And so please feel free to reach out to myself, or I can set you up with one of my trainees, and they're all sort of experts in this area, and can provide some really valuable and helpful insight if you have questions. Thank you so much for connecting, and have a great week. If you enjoy this channel, please like it, share it, and subscribe. Thank you so much.